Way in from Mombasa Road as well, going towards the city, but we're not into traffic hour just yet, so let's keep an eye on things and see how that all develops as we get into it. We'll talk on Spice FM KE on X hashtag the Situation Room.
Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
7:05, and welcome to the second hour of Kenya's biggest conversation this morning. Our live streams are up on YouTube, on Facebook, and on X, and our audience on KTN, Karibu Sana, and wherever you're listening across terrestrial radio in Kenya, in the region, on our streams, and indeed around the world. Welcome to the Situation Room. Ndu, CT, and Anki with you here this morning, and even as we get into vital conversations this morning, CT's been dropping nuggets of diamonds this week. Last week it was your wand. This week it's just tossing them out there. Mm-hmm.
Is it true that diamonds are a girl's best friend?
So they say.
These people, are they right?
Well, I don't know.
Depends on the girl.
It depends, doesn't it? So much depends on dependent. Right. Diamond Trust Bank wants to tell you that they have a mortgage plan that can meet your needs. And what do they mean by this? They mean that they are offering you a deal that covers you comprehensively. What do I mean comprehensively? If you are employed, meaning you are one of those individuals who has a pay slip. If you are self-employed, meaning you give yourself a pay slip. Or if you are in the diaspora, it doesn't really matter. You can access a mortgage. Now, the interesting features of this mortgage is as follows. There is a single-digit interest attached to it. 9% if you get a mortgage for 10 years. 9.75% if you get a mortgage for 25 years. Now, I'm about to put icing on this particular cake. There are no hidden charges.
Nice icing.
Let me put a cherry on top. If you happen to pay ahead of schedule, no one is going to penalize you. But more importantly, this is information that is readily available to you. If you get up, walk to any Diamond Trust branch, they'll be able to furnish you with the details that I'm giving you. And better still, you'll be able to have a conversation where you can match your needs, your capacity, the available money you have, and the dream that you now want to fulfill. Okay? But if you can't do that, then why don't you just email them at mortgages@dtbafrica.com. That's it.
Fantastic.
Yes.
That's it. The man is dropping diamonds, and you need to pick them up this morning and then find out how you can get into it. And I think necessary. We're getting into a justice conversation this morning, and access to justice is one of the things that we often discuss. Today, we're going to do that with Anne Ireri, who is the executive director of FIDA, which is Federation of Women Lawyers. It's been here before. So, Anne, good morning to you.
Good morning, and great to see you this year.
Asante sana. Good to see you as well.
Yeah.
You've been well?
I have been.
Good.
Cannot complain.
You're in the hot seat of Situation Room, as you know, and we're talking about a topic that, in my opinion, just doesn't get it. You can't get enough when we're talking about access to justice and actually making it a reality. I mean, we have an entire judiciary who has gone towards making sure that access to justice is something that is front and center for many people. So good to have you in that conversation today, and we'll be getting into it. CT is going to welcome you to the show with today's proverb. And so then I can already see you smiling at him in anticipation, waiting to see what it's going to be. So then you can then interpret that for us, right?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Now let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Do you know the capital of Burkina Faso?
Yes. Ouagadougou.
People who went to geography classes and paid attention. And the attention has not left them. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. The horse cared for by 2 grooms dies of hunger.
Very interesting.
Isn't it just?
My understanding of it is that when we don't have clear responsibilities, something has to give. I think in this case, you have two grooms who most likely are depending on each other to carry out the responsibilities, and tendering to a horse is not easy. So they keep on either passing the baton to each other, and there are no clear responsibilities on what should be done. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, it's the horse that suffers. And I think that's especially at workplaces in our country, globally, where we really call for accountability and the buck stopping at somebody who's really answerable in terms of responsibility. That's my interpretation of it.
You know, Du went to a school, in our primary school, there were one of the teachers, Miss Mistletoe.
He keeps baptizing this poor woman every time. You had a point.
Taught her many things. Clearly, the school he went to also had a Miss Mistletoe.
Indeed, it had.
Oh my goodness. All right. So, I mean, as we get into this conversation this morning, and we're looking at, making access to justice a reality in Kenya off the top. Is it not a reality in Kenya?
On paper, it is a reality, but we need to actualize it. We talk of legislated or regulated access to justice, but there's also what we call substantive access to justice, which is a reality that we're looking at. And for us, looking at where the country is at right now, working with the judiciary, that's our largest stakeholder as a Federation of Women Lawyers, and just really interacting with the time, effort, resources that Kenyans are spending, particularly in the court system, we need to find ways around it. And the beauty is that our constitution, at Article 48, which guarantees and outlines access to justice, has also mentioned alternative means, particularly under Article 159, that for most Kenyans, we understand accessing justice as going to court, but that is just one way. There are other ways, and that's where FIDA has come in. For the last 40 years, we are 40 this year, and we are very excited. We've been working around innovation and really making justice a reality, to the sense that I can have a matter, a dispute or a conflict resolved without overly spending my time, resources, and at the end of the day, whatever means I choose translates into what I would define justice to be. Hence, we have been key proponents of resolution mechanisms like mediation where appropriate, adjudication and negotiation, as well as arbitration, to be able to just balance off the litigation backlog that's currently being experienced in our courts. Yeah.
So what would beyond substantive access to justice look like?
For us, we are looking at a context where I am aggrieved as a party, and the process is cognizant of the injuries that have been occasioned to me, and the outcome speaks to what I had in mind in terms of restoring what had been violated. In a lot of cases, you don't get full restoration, but it's what we can quantify, and at the end of the day, justify there was a reason why we went through the process. And why is this important? Because if we don't have substantive access to justice, if people don't see the value of following procedure to resolve disputes and conflicts, we result in anarchy. Then we'll have people having to resolve disputes in very many different ways, often which lead to more conflict and at the end of the day, anarchy. Hence, we need to be able to have systems that assure parties that you will get what is yours or due to you at the end of the day. Yeah.
Maybe if you just give us a detailed explanation of substantive access to justice. When do I say this is satisfactory for me?
We look at many ways, at it in many ways, Doris. One, as I've said, is the time it takes.
Yeah.
Often when you are aggrieved, you want justice now and justice now, as soon as yesterday. So do we have processes that allow you to be able to get your redress within the shortest time possible? And then secondly is a cost element. For a lot of Kenyans, and I'll give the example of the court system is overly expensive for different reasons. One, our cases are not resolved immediately, so you have to keep on going to court. That means whether you have a lawyer or you are going to self-represent, you're incurring a cost. But there's also the time element. If you look at whether you're running a business, you're self-employed or you're employed, this is time that you'll take out of your daily schedule to go to court. And there's also the social cost, where everyone knows it's Anne who has sued Doris, and that will have an effect. So we have to see how to repair this relationship to the best of our ability. And that's why for us, we look at it, save for criminal cases that are well legislated within our criminal laws. These other cases surely can be resolved in many ways. If you have a dispute with your landlord, or you have a dispute with your neighbor over a boundary, or it's a family dispute like what we deal with at FIDA, we don't have to necessarily go to court. We can find ways to adjudicate, to mediate. It's faster. And remember, at the heart of it, we want to maintain relations to the best of our ability within the society as we can. The more we have conflict at individual level, the likelihood of having community conflict and societal conflict increases. So where possible, let's try and keep the relations going. Hence, looking at substantive justice from the element of being able to save on time, save on resources, but where possible, also maintain the relations that I had before.
Because one of the things that, because I know we're getting into the ADR, Kenyans are beginning to buy into it.
Yes.
There's the concern of, is it just as equally legally bound as the court case is? Because that's what the concern is. Because mediation, negotiations, in that closed door, Coca says, someone says, well, it might just change over time and they might not take it as seriously as in the court case before your owner. How would you assure Kenyans that it's just as legally bound to have the ADR platforms?
The assurance that Kenyans should take is, one, it is a legal, constitutionally recognized process. It is in our constitution under Article 159, which is the basis which the judiciary has taken to officiate and really make the process as legal as possible. So when you go to court and you're referred to mediation, that's a legal official process. If you choose not to go to court, but then you come to FIDA, for instance, and it is a domestic dispute over child support, the agreement that you get into is a legally binding document. But the beauty is that for those who have been through the process, it actually saves on time. And it's not only family or relational conflicts that are being resolved this way, but even commercial disputes, particularly in terms of businesses where you want to save on time, save on resources. We have seen such a high uptick, particularly of arbitration, and they do appreciate it's legal. And at the end of the day, because there is an agreement, should any of the parties backtrack on it, you can always go to court as a basis to ensure that it's enforced. So it is something that we are encouraging Kenyans to undertake, but particularly more so because we don't have a choice. If you look at the backlog of our judiciary, if you look at the cause lists that our magistrates and our judges have to deal with in a particular day, it's really not feasible to have cases resolved within 3 months as we'd want. And so if we are to move to places where, and a context where other countries have reached in terms of getting cases resolved in 6 months, in 7 months for the very difficult cases, as Kenyans, we must be open to embrace other forms of accessing justice. And as we keep on saying, justice is also in the eye of the aggrieved. So for as long as we can define what restoration means to you in terms of justice, then we should be able to avail a means that allows you to get that restoration in the fastest, most cost-effective means possible. Yeah.
There was a discussion that at some point had gained a lot of momentum, and that was one around community-trained paralegals. I thought it was a good discussion because when one talks about justice, one is then talking about a certain knowledge, the degree of knowledge somebody must have about the law.
True.
Can you speak to this? Where is it? What has been done? And how exactly does it work within a community setting?
Yes. So as you rightfully say, one, we must have awareness of what's happening. The knowledge must be present. And I want to really applaud the many institutions, not just FIDA, but very many institutions in the country, including the government itself, who have invested in what we'd call legal awareness at community level. Because for the community to come out, have trust in the structures and the systems, and be processed through the systems, they must have the information. So a lot has gone into educating the community. That's where the community paralegals have come in, and we have invested in paralegals to spread the awareness. The caveat we have introduced is to make sure that the paralegals don't get too excited to actually start forming local dispute and conflict resolution means, which can easily happen because this is a community setup. The community also is looking at a context where you're the one who has the information. Why can't you resolve the cases? So we've come historically from a place where, for instance, a lot of the chiefs used to resolve disputes. Even now they still do. But we have been able to lay out the law that when it comes to certain matters, for example, criminal cases, sexual and gender-based violence cases, this cannot be processed at community level. As much as they have been reported, they have to be processed through the criminal justice system. However, the community paralegals have acted as such great allies and facilitators of these local and community-driven dispute resolution mechanisms. And this has increased the acceptability at community level and also the uptake by the community of alternative dispute resolution. So we actually celebrate. We celebrate the community paralegals.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet there seems to be so much in terms of folks who don't know what to do or don't know what their rights are. And would access to justice be all-encompassing, whereby there is a flow of knowledge? Because when we think about justice, we think about the actual physical presentation of an individual in court. But it's a lot more than that, isn't it? It's about rights, it's about knowledge, it's about information. And there are folks who just don't know. How does that then become all-encompassing when we talk about access to justice?
The interesting issue, Nduku, you'll be surprised, is that from our assessment, Kenyans actually largely know by now because of the numerous engagements, whether it's awareness about land, awareness about democracy, awareness about human rights, not entirely to every corner of the country, but by and large, if you take a look at 5 years ago and where we are today, Kenyans have a lot of awareness. What's the challenge? The challenge is the lack of belief or trust that the issue will be resolved. If you take even a random interview at community level and you ask Kenyans, are you happy or do you know whether your rights have been violated or not, they'll tell you they know. The level of awareness in our country for sure has tremendously increased. What we need to match with that awareness is systems that actually restore and give trust in the citizens to be able to come out and report the cases and to have the faith that they will be resolved within the shortest time possible. And that's why we've been having extensive dialogue with the community. Allow me to give the example of FIDA. A few years ago, people always imagined that FIDA just caters to women. But I'll tell you factually, a great number of referrals today at FIDA are coming from men. Men themselves are walking into FIDA offices seeking help. What does that speak to? It speaks to the fact that there's been a lot of awareness created and acceptability of FIDA as an institution to resolve disputes. Now, what we then need to do with this level of trust by the community is to ensure that whatever solutions we offer, at least far and large, are able to restore or to reassure those who have come seeking assistance of their rights being restored. And that's where we need to work towards. And that's what we've also been trying to implore on the judiciary as members of the NCAJ, that's the National Council on the Administration of Justice, that Kenyans far and large, yes, there are pockets that may still not have the full awareness, but by and large, Kenyans at least have the basic knowledge of what is right and wrong and what their rights are. So what we now need to make sure is that we as a country, in terms of structures, whether it's the National Police Service, the prosecution, the judiciary, are prepared to be able to then match up that level of awareness. And that's where the work needs to be. Yeah.
You know, there is this notion that a poor man never gets justice. And then you talked about time, resource, and you're trying to make it easier. That's why we're talking about inclusion for all. But there are certain enemies of progress, like corruption.
Absolutely.
And you see now what's hitting the judiciary. Some are calling for the CJ's, removal, etc. What did you say in terms of corruption? Being an enemy of progress, among other things, though. I have a big problem with corruption myself.
Yes, I agree with you, Doris, and we all should be appalled by any level of corruption in the country. And corruption is very key and a pertinent portion of access to justice because it speaks to the credibility of institutions that are entrusted. Whether it's corruption by the police, we have seen it's been a driver why communities don't report cases. They've come up with instances, particularly now with gender-based violence and femicide, which FIDA has been interacting with for the longest time, that they reported cases to the police and no action was taken. Or the cases were compromised. And what do you have at the end of the day? We have loss of life. So that has to be addressed. Whether it's the prosecution system, that they need to have faith that you'll process my case well, it will be availed and presented before the court on time. We'll not have any kind of games with my court date, and that my matter will proceed. We have to address it. Very importantly, as you've mentioned, our judiciary. When everything else fails in most societies, our last point of recall is the judiciary or the restorers of justice. And so for us, we are taking even the current ongoings as members of the judicial fraternity, of the legal fraternity very seriously. And our call is that we need to get to the heart of it. We laud the Honorable Chief Justice. She herself has come out loudly to indicate that they're taking all actions to resolve corruption. But we have this thing in the country, Doris, that we always look at corruption from the from the macro level. Corruption is individual. You make that choice as an individual, whether to corrupt the system, to accept a bribe, to offer a bribe, or to circumvent the system. So we must have that conversation and try to individualize it as much as possible. Yes, we have spoken so much about it, and it's a plague in our country. But as we look at it, as we seek the long-term solutions to institutions that we feel need to do more and better, let's also look at ourselves individually. I used to have a lecturer in school, as I conclude, who used to tell us, in a room of 10 people, 11 of us have the potential to be corrupt.
In a room of 10 people?
Yes.
11 of us.
Yeah, have the potential. It is the opportunity that has not availed itself. Exactly. So as we seek the long-term solutions, as we look at ways of resolving the crisis in our country of corruption, let us individualize it. How do we treat each other? Even on basic, look at our public transport system. We break rules every day. We find PSVs driving on the wrong side. It's literally outrageous. I think the other day I did get to see a video of a sidewalk that has been designated to pedestrians, and we have PSVs in that vehicle. That's still a form of corruption. And for us to get serious and crack down on corruption, we must start with some of these things that might seem minute, but we must call them out. And that will give us the audacity to actually then call out any form of economic corruption.
Are we going to take a break?
Not yet, go ahead.
Okay, whenever we discuss this subject, the thing that always comes to my mind is just how widespread and how acceptable corruption is. And I keep thinking that when we have these discussions and we're talking about amending the laws and changing the law, we have a wonderful constitution.
Absolutely.
But does that constitution have in it sections where they say that these values we keep talking of must be taught in schools? There's a reason why I'm saying this. A generation like mine, hoping that they will change, you just keep hoping. If young children are taught, this is right, this is wrong, this is what you do, these children will even challenge their parents at home from a very, very young age.
Right.
The parent does that, the child says, no, that's not right, because teacher said this and this, and they can even quote the law. Do we push sufficiently so that the future generations don't do what we have done so well messing up a very good country. I was about to say a bloody good country.
It's out there.
Yes, of course. I say this because let me rephrase it. Is it possible for us to ensure that these young children learn the things that need to be learned so that they internalize the things which are right and so that they can put it into practice? Is it possible? Because if we look at, again, the generations that are now alive and well and adult, it is very hard work. I'm not saying it is impossible, I'm saying it is hard work. But there's an entire generation that doesn't need to be in this situation that we're in.
Yes.
If we take the step, can we do it?
Yes, we can. As you've said, City, rightly, our challenge in Kenya it's not the hardware, it's not the infrastructure. If there's a country that has beautiful laws, beautiful policies, regulations, actually we are a global benchmark. That I can tell you for sure. In terms of how to legislate, how to come up with laws, and how to be able to really prescribe solutions to each and every problem. Our challenge as Kenya, our problem, we are having software issues. It's our value system. And can that be rectified? It can, but it will call for a lot of work and, most importantly, the political will. I think there's a country in Latin America, I'm forgetting the name of that country, but it has a very young president who came in, and there was such a big crisis of drugs and narcotics. And the country just got to a point and said, we have to have this end. Our generations are being wiped away. And as much as the country supported him, the country was willing to make the sacrifice. That political will started from the top. He cracked it down, and right now it's coming out as one of the top countries in Latin America, which had such a big problem, of course, of narcotics. So why do I give that example? It is possible, but we have to own up and say that these are software issues. There is no law that will come and tell me, Anne, as much as I know stealing is wrong, I have to make that decision that I cannot steal. And as we fix it at individual level, then have political will that actually cracks a whip. And as you say, rightfully, City, why do we negotiate and make excuses for corruption? And we can see how fast it's getting our country down the drain. So we have to then support whatever measures are given. And at times it might call for drastic measures that really will stop the corruption, because right now it's widespread. There's no institution that has been spared. It is a crisis. And the challenge with a crisis that extends for too long, we start accepting it. The same way we have normalized, and someone was actually mentioning the other day, just on a different note, that it's unfortunate that as a country we are getting to a point post-corruption, we are now also normalizing loss of life.
Right.
It's no longer a big deal. It will be reported, whether it's a young lady or an elderly lady or a young man. We are getting to a very dangerous point as a country where we are normalizing loss of life. And that has to do with corruption. Why should we accept that? So we have to agree that what is now left are software issues, which will call for very drastic action at individual level, but we must have collective political will by those in responsibility to lead us out of fixing the software issues. And this cuts across the society.
We'll go into a little bit more of that detail, because I think it's actually necessary to do, whereby folks say, well, if you leave it up to people, they will not make the decision. And what needs to happen is that you need to have series of forced, and I'm saying it quote unquote, forced incidents whereby it has to happen and then you see it later. Almost kind of like affirmative action from a dictatorial point of view. But we'll look into the details of that as we come out of this. Anne Ireri is the Executive Director of FIDA Kenya, and we're talking about making access to justice a reality in Kenya and what it actually does look like. We'll take a break at this point and come back with this conversation. Are you running a small, medium or large business? Well, VetoFX, as a platform that ensures cross-border payments are not painful, says visit us today and find out how you can make sure that you can transact across 190 countries in 49 different currencies and not have to worry about hidden or high charges or have to wait a long time for your money to show up. Cross-border payments and its pain are a thing of the past, and you can do this with seamless transactions. Go to www.vertofx.com.
decoder. Discover something new every day on your StarTimes decoder. Buy an aerial decoder plus 1 month free classic bouquet subscription to enjoy the magic of African stories on ST Swahili, AMC Movies, and ST Nollywood. Tales of adventure that take you far on Bliss TV, ST Kung Fu, Z Cinema, and Nat Geo. Or a dish decoder plus 1 month free super bouquet subscription to watch heartwarming dramas that bring you closer.
Do you want to be my wife?
Yes, David. I want to marry you.
Exciting kids shows to keep the little ones entertained.
You got it, dude.
Experience the thrill of live sports on La Liga and Bundesliga. For every mood, for every moment. StarTimes. Enjoy digital life.
Kilichonishawishi upole wako na heshima yako. Wazazi wangu wamekusifia sana kwa tabia yako. Sura yako ya upole inanivutia. Shepu twiga mwenda pole najivunia. Oh, tupeane mapenzi iwachome.
Dial star 811 star 920 hash to get Natamba by Aslay.
Communiquer, très important. Le gouverneur Iban Bougidi Sayombe.
Olivier Solo, Dede Wachiba,
Jackie Murembo, Smart.
Les grands DJ Mato Sibour. Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
All right, so at 23 minutes to 8 o'clock, we continue our conversation this morning with Anne Ireri, who is the executive. And we're talking about making access to justice a reality in the country. A lot of things that hinge on access to justice, information, knowledge, communication, which we said, okay, to a large extent, people know. But the things that affect people are things sometimes not within their control, or even things that they dabble in, right? But usually, we won't stop until you see something major happening. And so then are the calls for drastic action to be taken. So when you talk about political will, there's no shop where you go and buy political will and, you know, get change and keep it moving. It's something that either happens after you make a decision or that because of an action, you're forced. The will or the desire to do something, one would say, is innate. And if it's not, we can bring it about. Is it necessary to force some of these things? I can force you to have the will if something happens. But it seems like it has to get to that point before that will is born. Are we to the point where it needs to be forced?
We are at that point, and we have been here before. And that's really the story of even FIDA Kenya. FIDA Kenya, as I mentioned, we are celebrating 40 years this year. And how was FIDA Kenya established? It was the same clamor for political will, that we needed the inclusion of women. We needed to make sure we had laws that really respect and respond to women's rights. And that's how collectively then a very small group of trailblazers came together and actually forced political will. And what was the outcome? We had laws that now are in the Constitution that speak to women and girls' rights and equality. We had equal chances for both men and women to be able to vie for office. And out of it, we have seen changes even in the healthcare system that speaks to reproductive health rights, which really affect women mostly. So to answer you, indeed, political will has to be forced, and we are at that point. Over the last 3 or 4 years, we've been working a lot with young people. We have deliberately targeted young leaders, both male and female, in our universities to have conversation with them. And from engaging with them and from the energy and the fire they have, we could actually see that there is hope. All is not lost. But it is that demographic that we must invest in, we must support, and we must be able to avail all necessary tools and information to be able to really start the social change. And I'm sure, for everyone, last year was a landmark year. We saw what collective social change can lead to. So there is hope. All is not lost, but we must keep the momentum. And most importantly, avail tools and support for those who are really coming out, in this case, largely a lot of young people and a lot of activists who are really calling for change. And where we are seeing positive change and good example, we need to celebrate that. So we must keep the momentum. And if it's not coming forth with, if the political will is not coming forth with voluntarily, there are means that citizens are empowered under our constitution to be able to ensure that we are always calling those in office, those who have responsibility, to action.
Yeah, indeed, political will. But then I'm also looking at institutions that ought to equally move with speed.
Yes.
Office of the, DPP, the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. There are certain institutions and bodies that ought to also just farm up and be as independent can be. I don't know what you'd say on that, because there's one thing looking at the president wanting this country to be straight, but there are other institutions that are either NCIC calling out on hate speech, etc. Institutions that you should do something. What did you just speak about those institutions? Someone else saying they're dead, as far as they're concerned.
I think some institutions need definitely to do more, but we have examples of others who are doing very well. I think if you look at a lot of the headlines today, particularly when it has to come to institutions like the Auditor General, the Controller of Office, whatever the case, and of course reports are divisive, but there are people who are trying their best to live up to the mandate they have been given. You see, ultimately, each of these independent offices is bestowed with a responsibility. Yours as a holder of that office is to do the best within your mandate. If there are issues that come out in terms of challenging, for instance, findings, there are procedures to challenge that. But at least we are seeing that there are those who are coming out to call out wrongs for what they are, or at least to call out what are red flags that need to be assessed and investigated further. So once you have an example of such institutions, they've done their part, but there are other complementary institutions that now need to take up a lot of these issues, whether it's a National Assembly, because that's also, Parliament is an institution. We need to see them also carrying in their weight and to be able to especially have the checks and balances. That's the purpose of any parliament in any country, to check on excesses of the executive. If it is a judiciary, they have the key role of adjudicating over justice and matters and conflict. And the beauty of our constitution is that we also have other independent institutions. So we need to see that independence play out. Of course, there's always a question of independence and interdependency, but ultimately, Kenyans want to see action. They have bestowed you with that mandate. And let's not forget, a key part of this institution's survival is that really they are being resourced from the taxpayers.
Okay.
So we need to see action because Kenyans are sacrificing taxes. We are being heavily taxed to be able to maintain a number, if not all, of these institutions fully. So we need to be able to see action.
Is there justice for the dead?
There is.
What are your thoughts on IPOA?
IPOA is a very good institution. It is an important institution, but we need to see a lot of action and support to their work. I know I don't want to say too much. I could have sat in other spaces that we investigated further their mandate, particularly several task forces. But the fact that they exist and they've taken oaths of office means they are ready to do whatever it takes to deliver on their mandate. So there is that provision. And what, in my view, institutions like IPOA and any other human rights institution needs to do is to reach out and assure those who are aggrieved that they'll get justice. And I think we have a very good case, as much as it's unfortunate, of baby Pendo. That's one of the cases, even before it got where it is. In terms of the criminal case where FIDA was involved, we actually saw justice was able to be attained in one way or the other. It is never sufficient because there's nothing that can bring back any life lost. However, we can have deterrents that would discourage any other person from ever trying to take out life of another in any way. So what we need to see then is, as I've said again, going back to our role as Kenyans, is that it has to be collective. Yes, we have this institution that is tasked, but where we see wrongs that are going on, there are other complementary institutions that should be able to call out and ask Institution X, why are we not seeing action on your part? And I'll go back again still to our reality, our lived reality as FIDA, where we have seen loss of life. And I'll give the instance of femicide. We started calling it out very early. And we actually agitated and made so much noise, not just last year, even the year before, because this has been an ongoing disaster in our country. And there are reasons that are leading to that. And as we speak, we can see there is a process that is trying to get to the heart and the bottom of it. Ultimately, no one else will fix our country other than ourselves. But for those of us who are in spaces who are able to do certain things. And for FIDA, we've gone way beyond our call of duty. In fact, the one thing we always share with Kenyans, to their amazement and surprise, is that many think we are government. We are not. We are 100% funded by donors. But beyond that, we have said and have taken it upon ourselves that we are going to make sure that indeed we are able to solve issues of Kenyans. Which brings me to the other point of mediation, in the interest of time, as I see, that all is not lost. And we are calling upon Kenyans of goodwill to be able to join causes such as ours or any other ongoing causes. Of course, this week is a special week. It's Women's Week.
Women's Week, yeah.
And towards that, FIDA has lined up a number of activities which we'll be sharing on social media, where Kenyans can be able to either go and participate or at least be able to seek advice and get advice to various legal issues that they are facing. But to cap it all, because we also don't want to just feel that all is gloom, we have lined up a fun day on Friday, which is our third annual charity golf tournament. And I want to underscore charity and to thank the many institutions who have come in to support us, including the Standard Group, because it is out of this support that we are actually making justice a reality. So we'll be having our golf tournament, our third annual golf tournament at the Royal Nairobi Club. The chief guest will be the Honorable Chief Justice herself. She is a golfer, so she'll be playing. And we are calling upon any Kenyans, the golfers who would want to support a cause, to be able to join us. But ultimately to underscore that the proceeds of this charity event are going towards making our mediation program a reality.
Right.
And we've been able to solve so many cases through mediation. And as I've told you, the icing on the cake is that men in Kenya are actually the ones coming to report cases now at FIDA and saying, we hear you have a mediation option. I'd want to bring my wife here to have a chat, and we are able to resolve these matters. And that's helping families stay together, being cognizant of even the prevailing economic times that are difficult. People don't, it is expensive to have a lawyer right now or to keep on going to court over a dispute or a conflict that could have easily been resolved through mediation. So we want to invite all Kenyans of all walks on the 7th, that is this coming Friday, to the Nairobi Royal Club. Please join the cause. It will be fun, but most importantly, it is a charity event that is going to strengthen the capacity of FIDA and the stakeholders we work with to be able to dispense justice within the very difficult prevailing circumstances we are facing in the country.
How does one get hold of FIDA?
So FIDA, we are available on all our socials. That is on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. But most importantly, physically, we have 3 offices in the country. In Nairobi, we are at Amboseli Road, off Gitanga Road as you go towards Kawangware. In Mombasa, we are on Links Road, just behind Links Plaza. We have our offices there. And in Kisumu, we are just very close to Milimani Primary School of Tomboya Street. So that's where we are at. However, because we have been limited by virtue of being charity or a non-governmental organization, we are not able to have offices everywhere. We work with amazing community-based organizations and male champions who are spread throughout our 47 counties. So if you get in touch with us, and we have our toll-free line, 0800 720 501. If you call FIDA, whichever corner of the country that you're at or you have a challenge in, we'll find people on standby. A legal team is on standby to give you advice, to refer you to either our pro bono lawyers who support us as well, or community-based leaders who will be able to assist you. And we have seen that work. Yes.
You know, one of the things that worries me about the discussion around corruption, we sometimes overlook the real problem, and the real problem is impunity. If and how it is that it spreads its tentacles so that it is everywhere. And then what it leads to. We've had criminal institutions in this country that the government has worked hard to get rid of. But one of the things that has often helped many communities and societies to get rid of such malcontents is when the communities have faith in their system of government.
True.
And when the basic services that they need are provided, it snuffs out the opportunity for somebody who would now want to bring criminal elements into a system. But in the absence of this, the criminal elements now have an opportunity to provide similar services. For instance, security. Yes, they have an opportunity to provide financial services. These are criminal enterprises. Once we lose faith, or once our levels of distrust in the system are high enough, all these things that we keep seeing, whether it is femicide, whether it's just wanton killing of people, whether it doesn't start with that. It starts with people breaking the law. And then understand that it is acceptable and it is okay. You can break the law.
With no consequences.
That is it. You understand, because no one will steal if they know that the consequences are dire.
True.
But when they understand that you can buy away the consequences, I'm going back to my previous discussion. How do we get our younger citizens, the children, to actually understand the need to uphold the law and to understand it as being sacrosanct? Because it's something that we've spoken of here, but it must be taught. It must be part of the curriculum. It is good for me to know about clouds. It is good for me to understand about microorganisms. These are very good. But if I do not know right from wrong, then I and the generation that I'm with will have a problem.
True.
How do we get this to be something that is a clarion call? Because I'm looking at what we have in the country right now, and I'm looking at parents struggling to get the children to school, the things they need to do, trying to ensure that people actually get to eat. There's so much just to ensure that you are alive, that when you bring in the discussion of right and wrong, they'll want to know, why are you...
Why are you talking about this now?
Exactly.
Is it necessary?
What,
They would say that.
What? See, and all because we have gotten to a point where runaway impunity, because this is the mother of corruption, is what we seem to be witnessing daily. How do we get to teach the young to actually understand this, so that their lived experience is living by the rule of law and ensuring that others do the same?
A good place, in my view, to start would be just what you've said. That, one, as Kenyans, which is a reality, we are so caught up in this rat race of trying to make things work that we have no time to talk about corruption.
Right.
But supposing we flip that argument, first and foremost, why has life become so hard? I mean, Kenyans a few years ago, not that life was perfect, but it was okay. Partly because, not partly, hugely because of the same corruption we are talking about. The system has failed. it's nearing collapse in some instances. We have no faith in dispute resolution, that we actually have institutions that decide to resolve disputes. And these are institutions we fund by dumping rubbish outside each other's gates instead of going to court. And by now, we should have people seriously already jailed for that. That was a very big criminal act.
Yes.
But see, that speaks to this, how broken the system is. And someone once said, when we start costing corruption, and I know elements have been done to cost corruption, again at macro level, but individualize it. Why? Okay, even for a normal, let me use the example of a salaried or unemployed Kenyan. You used to have a certain salary. And we know the conversation without negating it. But to get to where we are, why is life getting hard? And is there value addition? Because those are the individual conversations we must have. And once we understand, we'll now be able to speak to our children. Let me give another pragmatic example, City, to just localize what you're saying. I recall when the Gen Zs went out to the streets and they were being interviewed. And a number of them actually said they were tired of hearing their parents complaining in the house. They actually said that or dad or mom used to do X and Y for me.
And now they don't.
Exactly. That means the effect was really hitting home. So the same way, we have to find a way of, we as the parents, we as the mature adults, of now looking at the cost of this broken system and the corruption to the generations that are coming up and our children. And insisting, we have that power. I mean, it's parents who sit in the PTAs. We have parent representatives even in curriculum development to ensure that when we speak about it, it is taught in school, but we have to go beyond the teaching, because the challenge with only teaching it means children will sit just to pass the exam. It might be forgotten easily. But how do we mainstream it as a way of life? We must have, one, deliberate measures on what we are accepting as acceptable behavior and calling out impunity, even in terms of our leaders, whether it's now places of worship. We must set the example. Because, City, even if today I tell my child that, look, stealing is wrong, but then the everyday example they are given are heroes who are being glorified, who are actually thieves. Then we are being counterproductive. So if we are to really walk the talk as Kenyans, we must have collective action. From mainstreaming it and teaching it to calling out the example, but we must also localize and call out in any space what we call impunity or corruption and its effect. Why should I suffer if I'm a trader, if I was a trader near the building that was affected for 4 days, I was not able to make a living, simply because two institutions that should be able to solve issues in a court of law are muscling themselves in the most
juvenile.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, but more so, and the cost of it, not just business, assuming there's even someone who was affected, because lives could be affected, health was at risk, and we've moved on like it's okay. So those are some of the examples, because yesterday it was those two institutions. Trust you me, we'll have a similar
and there'll be others
at some point, and that's what we need to now start curbing.
When you look at access to justice and you look at some of these things that we speak of, because there's access at that level, do you think then that it is then easier or more effective to hold those in a higher responsibility to account if at whatever other level that we see that access and that we as individuals are holding ourselves to account? Does it become easier for me to then be able to say, excuse me, man X or woman Y in leadership, you cannot do this, if I'm sure that at this level I am also being held and bound accountably?
Yes, it has to be cross-cutting, in the sense that even at a workplace, I'll give my example of FIDA, if I'm not doing the right thing, but I have colleagues who I can see are doing the right thing, it makes it easier for them to call me out and to tell me, look, no, this is not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to do X, Y, Z. So we must also take it upon ourselves that if we start by accepting what is right and living and walking the talk, then it gives us the impetus, the moral authority. Remember, ultimately, I gave the example of the PSVs. If we are not able to call out, or this, you see, it's very ironical how the Boda or PSV who has overlapped on the wrong side will be calling out his leader for accountability. It can't work that way. We must we ourselves must walk the talk by obeying what and having very, very clear measures to hold ourselves to account. We don't need to have police officers at roundabouts in traffic because we will respect the traffic lights. Then that way we have the moral authority to call out anyone who is
power.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Anne Ireri is the executive director of FIDA, and she's been here this morning, and we've been looking at, access to justice and making that a reality. There is a golf tournament taking place on the 7th of March. That's this Friday, and that's being organized by FIDA and, of course, partners across board. And what that does is ensure that folks around the country then, through, you participating in this, can actually have the access that they need. And we'll be looking forward to, participating in that. So thank you so much for being here this morning.
And thank you for having me. And once again, thank you for your support.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Conversations continue. Good morning. It's 8 o'clock.
This is